The year was 1865, and the frontier was both a cradle and a coffin. The war had ended, but peace had not yet reached the edge of the world where the wind cut through timber and silence was a thing alive. Evelyn Carter had learned to live with that silence. It was her companion now, thick as the smoke curling from the hearth, cold as the wind that slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls. She sat before the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of cooling broth, eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to open. But no one came anymore. Her husband lay buried beneath the birch tree out back, taken by raiders 3 months past. What lingered of him were splinters of memory and the rifle propped against the wall. Outside, the sky bled the last light of day into the coming storm. The horses had fled weeks ago, the barn burned to a black skeleton. Evelyn had salvaged what she could. Tools, a sack of cornmeal, a prayer whispered through clenched teeth. She told herself she would last the winter, though she no longer knew why. When the wind began to howl like a dying beast, she rose to bolt the door. That was when she heard it, the crack of a gun, sharp and close. The cup slipped from her fingers. She froze. Another shot followed. Then silence, so heavy she could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Evelyn reached for the rifle, though it felt cold and foreign against her palms. She moved to the window, peering through the frost. The forest beyond swayed in the storm's breath, branches thrashing like restless ghosts. At first she saw nothing. Then movement, a figure stumbling through the trees, dark against the snow. She held her breath as he came closer, half collapsing into the clearing before her cabin. Blood marked the snow in uneven drops behind him. He fell face first into the drift. For a long moment she did not move. It could be a trap, someone left wounded to draw her out. She waited, watching the line of trees for others. But the woods remained still. The man lay motionless, his breath sending faint wisps of steam into the cold. Evelyn's pulse hammered at her temples. Her instinct screamed to bar the door, to pretend she had seen nothing. But something older, deeper, urged her forward. She pulled on her shawl, unlatched the door, and stepped into the storm. The wind cut at her like a blade. Snow stung her eyes. She knelt beside the fallen man, turning him over with trembling hands. His face was lean, his skin copper-toned beneath the grime and blood. A feathered braid trailed from his hair, matted with ice. She drew in a sharp breath, a Cheyenne. Her husband had spoken of them often, with both fear and admiration. Yet here one lay dying at her feet, his chest rising shallowly beneath a torn deerskin shirt. She looked toward the dark woods once more, then back at him. "Damn you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom she spoke. Hooking her hands beneath his arms, she dragged him toward the cabin, boots scraping across the frozen ground. By the time she heaved him inside, her breath came ragged and her limbs ached from cold. She slammed the door shut, dropped the bolt, and collapsed beside him. The man was heavy with the weight of blood and exhaustion. She pressed her fingers to the wound on his side, still bleeding. Without thinking further, she fetched a basin of water from the hearth, tore a strip from her petticoat, and began to clean it. The smell of iron filled the room, sharp and thick. His eyes fluttered open once, dark and wild, but he said nothing. She worked until the bleeding slowed, binding the wound tight. When she finished, her hands were shaking, and his breathing had steadied to a faint rhythm. She sat back, staring at him in the flicker of firelight. The flames painted his face in gold and shadow. He was young, no older than 30, with the kind of stillness that belonged to hunters and ghosts. Her heart twisted with something she could not name. She told herself she had only done what any Christian woman might. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying. Hours passed. The storm raged against the roof, but inside only the fire spoke. Evelyn dozed in her chair, waking at each creak of wood. When dawn came, the world outside lay buried in white. The man still slept, his breath shallow but steady. She poured a cup of broth, set it beside him, and waited. When he stirred at last, his gaze snapped to hers, wary and sharp. "Easy," she said softly, raising her hands. "You're hurt." He tried to sit, but grimaced in pain, falling back. Why? The word came halting, heavy with accent. She frowned. Why, what? Why help? Evelyn hesitated. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Because I couldn't leave you out there. He studied her, eyes narrowing as if trying to weigh the truth in her face. At length he nodded, though suspicion lingered like smoke. He took a sip of the broth, wincing. They did not speak for some time. The air between them felt taut, stretched thin by things neither could say. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. You alone here? Yes. She met his gaze squarely. My husband's gone. He looked toward the burned barn visible through the frosted window. Raiders? Her throat tightened. Yes. Yours? For a heartbeat, she thought he might be offended, but he only shook his head. No. White men. They come, take everything. Kill. He gestured toward his wound. I run. Something inside her faltered. Shame and understanding tangled within her chest. I see, she murmured. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence that followed. Outside, a raven called, its cry slicing through the morning stillness. Evelyn moved to tend the hearth, adding another log. She could feel his eyes on her, watchful yet tired. Later, when the light dimmed again, he spoke her name for the first time, soft but sure. Evelyn. She turned. My name Talon, he said, touching his chest. She nodded, unsure what to reply. It was near dusk when movement outside caught her eye, a shadow passing by the window. She froze, then motioned for silence. Talon's head lifted, instantly alert as a wolf. The faint jingle of spurs reached her ears, then voices, low, coarse, familiar. Raiders. Her blood ran cold. She snatched the rifle, whispering, onto the floor. Talon's eyes flicked toward the loose planks near the hearth. He moved quickly, silent despite the pain. She pulled a rug over the spot just as the door shook with a heavy knock. Evenin', missus, came a drawl from outside. We're looking for someone. Injun fella hurt bad. You seen him? Evelyn's hand trembled on the rifle. Ain't seen no one, she said evenly. The door creaked open anyway, and two men stepped inside, their faces red from cold, their eyes mean. They scanned the cabin, the table, the bed, the corner shadows. One of them moved closer to the fire, his boot heel tapping dangerously near the hidden boards. Evelyn forced herself not to look down. After a tense moment, the man spat into the fire and grinned. Reckon he froze out there. Then, shame. They turned to leave. When the door finally shut behind them, Evelyn sank to her knees, breath shaking. Talon emerged from beneath the floor, eyes dark with gratitude and something deeper. She met his gaze, heart pounding. For the first time in months, she did not feel entirely alone. And as the fire crackled between them, softer now, she thought she saw it, just for a moment, the faintest flicker of warmth that was not from the flames. Snow lingered in patches long after the storm passed, crusted hard beneath the pale light of early spring. The world outside Evelyn's cabin was silent, but for the creak of thawing branches and the distant cry of a hawk. Talon stood near the door, his wound half-healed, shoulders taut beneath a deerskin shirt she had stitched herself. His presence filled the small room now, quiet, steady, a shadow that moved with purpose. Evelyn had grown used to the rhythm of his footsteps, the soft scrape of his knife against wood as he carved, the low hum he made when lost in thought. The silence between them had softened, no longer edged with fear, but something heavier, unspoken understanding. He had saved her from more than loneliness. The raiders hadn't returned since that night, but the memory of their boots on her floorboards haunted her dreams. When she woke, sweating, eyes wide in the dark, it was often to find Talon already watching, as if sensing her unrest. He never spoke of his own nightmares, though she could see them in the tightness of his jaw, in the way he sometimes touched the scar along his ribs as though it burned anew. They worked together when the sun climbed high. She tilled what ground the frost had spared, and he hunted, returning with rabbits, or sometimes venison, his face wind-burned, his hands raw. When he built a new fence where the barn once stood, she helped drive the posts, sweat streaking her temples. Neither said the word home, but both treated the place as if it could become one. One evening, she found him standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You'll leave when you're healed," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He didn't look at her. "You want to go?" Evelyn hesitated. "I didn't say that." He turned then, eyes catching the last slant of sun. "You help me live. I help you live. That's enough, maybe." She wanted to agree, to let the truth hang unchallenged between them, but something in her chest tightened. And after she asked, "When the soldiers come again, or the raiders?" Talon's expression hardened. "Then we fight." She studied him. This man the world had marked as an enemy, though his courage and kindness put most men she'd known to shame. The firelight behind her flickered against his face, and she realized with a jolt of fear and longing that she no longer saw a stranger. Days stretched into weeks. The snow melted, rivers swelled, and the earth began to breathe again. Evelyn noticed the signs first, broken branches along the path, distant smoke where no chimney should be. She mentioned it once, but Talon only frowned, eyes narrowing toward the trees. "They close," he said. "The men who burn." That night, neither of them slept. Talon sat near the door, knife in hand, while Evelyn packed what she could into a worn satchel. When dawn came, a column of smoke rose to the west. Another homestead burned. She could smell it, charred wood, death on the wind. "We go," Talon said simply. She stared at the cabin walls, at the faint carvings her husband had made, at the place that had been both prison and sanctuary. "This is my home," she whispered. "Not anymore." His tone was gentle, but his eyes were unyielding. "You stay, you die." Evelyn's breath shook. She turned away, jaw clenched. "You think running solves everything?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over hers. "Running, no. Living, yes." The words struck deep, sharper than any blade. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. "Give me 10 minutes." By the time the sun broke through the treetops, they were gone, leaving behind only footprints and the echo of closing doors. They moved through the wilderness like ghosts avoiding open trails. The land was waking, green pushing through the thaw, rivers swollen and fierce. Talon walked ahead, eyes scanning for danger, every movement silent and deliberate. Evelyn followed, clutching her rifle and the satchel slung across her back. Each mile stripped something from her, fear, pride, grief, until all that remained was will. They camped by the river that night. The water's roar filled the air, drowning out the world beyond. Evelyn sat close to the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. Talon returned from scouting with 2 fish and a wary expression. "Raiders not far," he said. "Maybe one day behind." Her stomach turned to ice. "How'd he know?" He pointed upriver. "Tracks horses. 4, maybe 5. She stared into the flames. "Then we keep moving." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "You strong," he said after a moment. "Not many like you." She smiled faintly, the first real smile in weeks. "You don't know me." Talon poked the fire with a stick. "Know enough." Silence settled, thick with things neither dared to voice. The firelight danced over his features, softening the scar that ran along his jaw. She wondered how many lives that mark represented, how many losses he carried. When their eyes met, she looked away, quickly, afraid of what she might say if she didn't. The next day brought rain, cold, relentless, seeping through their clothes. The ground turned to mud beneath their boots. They crossed ravines slick with moss, forded shallow creeks that bit at their skin. When the downpour finally eased, a low growl rippled through the trees. Evelyn froze. Talon motioned for silence. The growl came again, closer. A bear emerged from the undergrowth, massive and black, hunger gleaming in its eyes. Evelyn raised her rifle, hands trembling. The bear reared, roaring. The sound tore through the forest. Talon stepped in front of her, knife drawn. "Shoot," he shouted. The rifle cracked. Smoke burst from the barrel. The bear stumbled, roared again, and lunged. Talon met it head-on, driving the blade deep into its side. The beast crashed forward, its weight knocking him to the ground. Evelyn screamed, reloading with shaking hands, firing again until the air was thick with gunpowder and silence. When it was over, Talon lay still beneath the creature's bulk. She rushed to him, pulling with all her strength until he was free. His arm was bleeding where the claws had grazed him. He opened his eyes slowly, breath ragged. "You shoot good," he murmured. Tears stung her eyes. "You're a fool," she said, voice breaking. "You could have died." He smiled weakly. "Then you save me again." That night, they camped near the riverbank, their fire small but steady. Evelyn cleaned his wound, her hands gentler now. Rain pattered softly on the leaves overhead. He watched her in silence, the firelight catching the gold in her hair. When she finished, he caught her wrist. "You afraid?" "Of what?" "Me. The world. What comes next?" She met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "All of it." He nodded slowly. "Good. Fear keep you alive." She pulled her hand away, though her heart ached with the space between them. As the fire crackled low, she lay beside him beneath the worn blanket, the river whispering nearby. She thought of her husband, of the life she'd lost, and of the man beside her, enemy, savior, stranger, and something more. When morning came, the river was swollen to a torrent. The raiders were not far behind. Talon stood at the bank, eyes on the wild current. "We cross," he said. Evelyn stared at the churning water. "We'll drown." "Better drown free than burn trapped." She swallowed hard, nodding. Together they stepped into the icy current. The force nearly pulled her under. Talon's hand clamped around hers, strong, unyielding. The river roared, the cold biting to the bone, the world reduced to motion and breath. She slipped once, twice, but his grip held. When they finally reached the far bank, she collapsed to her knees, gasping. Talon knelt beside her, his chest heaving. Rain began again, light and steady. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, trembling. He said nothing, only wrapped his arm around her and held her close. The fire they built that night was small, flickering beneath the shelter of a rock ledge. Evelyn watched the flames dance, soft and golden against the darkness. For the first time in months, she wept, not from fear, but from release. The river had taken everything, yet somehow it had left them both alive. The fire crackled low in the hearth, its glow spilling over the rough-hewn walls of the cabin. Outside, the storm that had howled through the valley had spent its rage, leaving behind only the whisper of wind through the pines. Inside, silence pressed thick between them. Samuel by the window, rifle in hand, eyes trained on the darkness beyond, and Clara near the fire, her trembling fingers mending the tear in his blood-stained sleeve. Neither spoke. The air carried too much of what had been said, and more of what could not be. He'd killed again that night. Not for gold, not for vengeance. For her. The men who came for the bounty on his head had found instead the bite of his bullet and the edge of his rage. But as he stood there now, shadows shifting across his face, Clara saw not the outlaw who had saved her life, but the man still shackled to his past, the soldier who never came home, not truly. "They won't stop," he said at last, voice low, worn thin by more years than his age should have allowed. "You know that, don't you?" Clara looked up, the firelight catching the faint trace of tears she refused to let fall. "Then we'll keep moving," she said. "West, maybe. Somewhere the world's too wide to care who we were." Samuel turned, the lines of his face hardened by doubt. "Ain't no place wide enough to outrun ghosts." She set the cloth aside, stood and faced him. "Then we don't run. Not anymore." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet fierce. It was the first time she'd spoken of staying, of making this broken land something like home. But outside, beneath the dark pines, something shifted. Hooves in the distance. Samuel's jaw tightened. He blew out the lamp. "Get the horses ready." By the time the first lantern lights appeared through the trees, they were already gone, two riders swallowed by the fog that clung to the valley floor. The posse came hard behind them, led by a man with a scar carved across his cheek and hatred burning where mercy should have lived. Sheriff Callan, once Samuel's commanding officer, now the hunter who knew too much of the hunted. The trail wound through the old mining road, slick with mud and broken stone. Samuel urged his horse forward, the cold slicing through his coat. Clara rode close behind, her breath turning to mist in the air. The night was thick with danger, but she felt something shift inside her, a strange, fierce calm. She had feared many things since that day the raiders burned her home, but not this. Not him. Not anymore. Gunfire split the silence. Samuel spun his horse, returning fire. Sparks danced from stone as bullets struck near their feet. Clara ducked low, clinging to the saddle horn as Samuel fired again. One shot, two, three, each echo swallowed by the storm. Then came a cry from behind and the thud of a rider hitting earth. Callan's men fell back for cover. Samuel didn't wait. He grabbed Clara's reins, pulled her toward the narrow pass that cut through the ridge. They reached the edge by dawn. From there, the valley fell away in rolling fog and distant river. Samuel's horse stumbled, spent from the climb. He dismounted, chest-heaving. Clara followed, every breath tasting of ash and fear. "We can't keep running like this," she said, voice trembling. Samuel didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the first light broke through, gold spilling across the peaks, soft as a prayer. "We're almost there," he murmured. "Ain't much further." But Clara saw the blood on his side, a dark stain spreading slow and sure beneath his coat. "You're hurt." He tried to shrug it off, but the pain buckled him to one knee. She was beside him in an instant, pressing her hand to the wound. "You can't." He caught her wrist gently, eyes meeting hers. "Listen to me. If they catch up, you ride. Don't look back." "No," she said, the word sharp as flint. "Not after all this. I won't leave you." A shout echoed from below. The posse had found their trail again. Samuel rose, forcing himself upright, and pulled her toward the cabin hidden in the pines just ahead, a hunter's refuge long abandoned. Inside, the air was cold and stale, but there was a hearth and wood enough to burn. Clara lit the fire, hands trembling as she worked. The flames took slow, licking at the dry bark until the room filled with warmth and flickering light. Samuel leaned against the wall, face pale, breath shallow. "They'll be here soon," he said. "Then we make our stand," she replied, loading a spare rifle with steady hands. He watched her. This woman who had once been a stranger caught in his crossfire, now the reason he still drew breath. There was steel in her now, tempered by loss and the long road that had bound them together. The first knock came soft, a trick of wind, maybe. The second was the sound of a boot against wood. Samuel raised his rifle, eyes narrowing. "Samuel Gray." Callan's voice cut through the storm outside. "You've run long enough. Come out, and maybe I'll let the lady live." Clara stiffened. Samuel didn't move. "He won't keep his word," she whispered. "I know." Then he looked at her, really looked, and something in his gaze softened. "Whatever happens, Clara, know that you gave me back something I thought was gone." Before she could answer, the door splintered inward. Gunfire roared. Samuel dropped one man with a clean shot, then another. Clara fired two, the recoil jolting through her arms. The cabin filled with smoke and chaos. Bullets tore through the walls. Then silence. Callan stepped through the haze, revolver drawn, his face ghostly in the firelight. "Should have stayed dead, soldier." Samuel smiled, a grim, weary thing. "Reckon I tried." The gunfire that followed was almost lost beneath the storm's dying wind. When it ended, Callan lay sprawled across the floorboards, his blood mingling with the mud and ash. Samuel slumped against the wall, his own strength fading. Clara crawled to him, hands shaking. "Stay with me, please." He smiled faintly. "The fire, it's warm." Tears broke free at last. She pressed her forehead to his, the fire's glow wrapping them both. "It's home," she whispered. "You made a home." Outside, dawn broke clean and quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and still. Within the cabin, the flames burned steady, gentle, unwavering, alive. And where love lived, even the flames grew gentle.